Hi, everyone. It's just a few minutes before 7 o'clock. We're going to start right on time at 7 o'clock. So hang on for just 1 or 2 moments more, and then we'll go ahead and get started. Okay, it's 7 o'clock on my watch, so let's go ahead and get started. I'm the first speaker, and I'm the least important part of this presentation anyway, so I'll go ahead and kick it off, and then we'll turn it over to Sabrina. Just in terms of the way that we've structured this evening's community engagement session, I'm going to speak for a moment. I'm going to turn it over to Sabrina. Sabrina has some slides she wants to walk folks through. We are cognizant of the fact that we've got a lot of material to cover, and so we've tried to structure this in such a way that we will leave ample time for questions and comments after Sabrina's presentation. So we'll allow her to get through the presentation, and then we'll turn it over to the audience to take any questions or comments that you might have, and Sabrina will walk you through that as well. So go ahead and get started. So welcome, everyone. Tonight is our first community engagement session for our project to create a form-based code for the Chappaqua Hamlet. A traditional zoning code regulates land use by dictating where certain use, i.e. business, residential, or industrial, can occur. By comparison, a form-based code looks at how zoning relates to infrastructure, parking, open space, design, architecture, etc., and focuses more on the form of the building as opposed to mandating its use. The form-based code will include design and architectural standards that will enhance the aesthetics of our Chappaqua Hamlet, giving our town a cohesive and intentional design. This rezoning project seeks to solve for current problems in the hamlet. For example, the ability to change land use and to redevelop vacant lots, like, for example, the former Rite Aid property, allowing for a mixed use, so having residential above commercial, and critically, enabling the town to be able to meet the demand for residential units within the hamlet. With regard to housing, specifically, zoning will help to increase affordability, add diversity, and meet the needs of young families, our local workforce, empty nesters, seniors, and more. The form-based code comes out of the goals of the 2017 comprehensive plan, and I quote, "to preserve the town's bucolic residential character and its historic resources while promoting new mixed-use development in the hamlets to meet the community's housing needs and foster thriving commercial and civic spaces." Several people have asked me, why is the town doing this now? First, it's important to note that this project did not begin in 2020. We were already concerned about the vacant properties in our struggling downtown even prior to the COVID crisis. Upon taking office in 2020, we took immediate action. We created a vacant storefront registry. We passed the facade improvement grant program. We expanded the mission of Discover Chappaqua. These things alone are not enough. The pandemic has amplified the crisis. And of course, not just here in Chappaqua, but in every downtown, everywhere. And right now, at this moment, towns and villages across Westchester are looking at changing their zoning in order to encourage mixed-use development, diversify housing, create pedestrian and bike-friendly streets, and streamline the review and approval processes for their projects. For example, in Yorktown, the town board has introduced legislation that's set to begin public hearings to create a zoning overlay district for greater flexibility in developing the downtown areas. In Mount Kisco, just up the road, a public hearing will be held on October 5th for zoning changes for village-owned land, including a portion of the parking area near their downtown train station. In Ossining, village officials are working on a project known as Ossining Tomorrow, which may include establishing an overlay zone in downtown and on the Croton Avenue corridor. And in Greenberg, the board is considering rezoning the small business corridor in Hartsdale known as Four Corners to enable mixed-use development and to make the approvals process easier. We are not alone. The time to act is now. We are doing this now because we have 17 vacant storefronts in the Chappaqua Hamlet. We are doing this now because there's significant demand for residential housing units as people flee the city during the pandemic and perhaps forevermore. We are doing this now because this community, Newcastle, cannot and will not sit back on our heels while the surrounding towns and villages revitalize their downtowns. Now is exactly the right time to take action, to revive our hamlet, to protect our property values, and to ensure that we are Chappaqua strong, even as we face an uncertain future. All of that said, we, your town board, and we're all here tonight, we understand that scale and density matter, as does preserving open space, expanding parkland, and we want to make sure that any future development is aligned with the character of our community. We're not looking to be White Plains or New Rochelle or even Greenwich. Our standards, as we develop them in the form-based code, must preserve the quaint feel of our town by requiring design that fits with what exists today. I'm glad to see so many people in attendance, and I hope everyone will listen with an open heart and an open mind to the information that Sabrina is about to present. We look forward to hearing your questions and feedback, and thank you all for your participation. Sabrina?
Thank you, Ivy. And I think Ivy, kind of set the stage pretty well as to what this is about. Tonight is the first of 3 public engagement sessions. And given that the information is voluminous regarding this rezoning project, we've divided the sessions up. And tonight I'm going to spend a bunch of time going through the origins of this project and what it is. On Thursday, October 8th, we're going to have another engagement session where we focus on 2 areas of the DGEIS, visual and transportation, because there are some impacts in those areas that deserve their own time and attention for you, the public. The last section, public engagement session, we want to focus on alternatives. And much of what we're doing now is driven by New York State law, and I will go through that. But we were required to examine alternatives to the rezoning, and we're going to go through those separately on October 15th. All of these sessions are going to be recorded. They will be available for access online. And if you would like, you can reach out to me at chappaqua@mynewcastle.org, and I will be more than happy to speak with you and answer any additional questions. My goal tonight is to kind of explain to you what this is, what it means, and where we go from here. So with that, I'm going to bear with me as we deal with technology and moving forward. That did not work. Here we go. So as I said before, there's a lot of information. The home of the information that you can access is available at chappaqua.org. Here's the website. When you're at the website, there's a sidebar of information. I'm highlighting it with my highlighter. On the sidebar, if you click documentation GEIS, generic environmental impact statement, you will find 10 documents that relate to the generic environmental impact statement available for you to review. I want to caution you, they are very large documents. They do take a little bit to download, so don't expect them to pop up in your system quickly. Okay, they're very intensive. We will also have paper copies for viewing by the public available at Town Hall and at the Chappaqua Library. If you call us or send me an email, we will make sure that you will have access to the documents any way that we can get them to you. How did we get here? So this is, these are just pinpoints in time. In 2014, the town conducted a public engagement effort, and we produced the public engagement report where we did extensive outreach to the community in all sorts of forms, whether it be meetings, surveys, online discussions. We asked people what they liked about Newcastle, what they didn't like about Newcastle, and what they thought we should do to make it better. In 2017, we used the information that we garnered from the public engagement, and we created a policy document that said, these are the policies of our town today, and these are the actions we're going to take to implement these policies. In 2018, the town board issued a moratorium on development within the business and retail zoning districts in the Chappaqua Hamlet. It has been extended 2 times thus far, December 2019 and June 2020. We are currently under our 3rd extension of that moratorium, which expires by the end of this year. In 2019, the town board hired a consultant team consisting of Kimley Horn, Tortagalis and Partners, and Rest Group with Joel Russell as the attorney to help us develop the form-based code that we are looking at today. We held extensive outreach meetings in 2019. For example, we met with emergency services, the business community, the historical society, town department heads and other groups, the Chamber of Commerce, to discuss what we were planning for in relation to rezoning of the Chappaqua Hamlet. We also formed a downtown working group in 2019, and their meeting started in May. Their intention was to work with the consultant team in developing the form-based code. We had representatives of the town board, the planning board, representatives of the development community, residents who lived in town, and professionals who lived in town who sat on that working group and helped advise the consultant team how to put the code together for our community. We then proceeded to hold additional outreach meetings and conduct other outreach in 2019, 2020, even up to today. And in 2019, it was the first time that we saw a draft of the form-based code. Right now, 2020, we're examining the draft generic environmental impact statement for the form-based code. So just to kind of take a step back in 2017, because that's where rezoning comes from. In 2017, we updated the comprehensive plan. I said before, we created a policy document that had 48 goals, policy-based goals of how to improve Newcastle to meet the needs of today and what we imagined the future would be for the next 15 years. On this slide are four goals that really relate to rezoning of the Chappaqua Hamlet. And there's many more out of the 48 that apply to what we're doing, but I think that these are pretty primary. The first, and we heard loud and clear from the community, was to preserve the bucolic residential character of the community's neighborhoods. Right? This is very much tied to the last bullet on this slide: locate higher density residential development in the hamlets, with density of development decreasing as distance from the hamlet centers increases. Ensure adequate infrastructure service to meet existing and future demand. Our roadway systems, our stormwater systems, our water systems, our sewer systems, our fire suppression systems, you name it. So the general policy in the comprehensive plan was focused on our existing developed areas for increasing density and addressing the development needs that were identified in the comprehensive plan. This is the study area, and it very much matches all of the business retail and business retail parking districts in the Chappaqua Hamlet. So it runs from Washington Avenue just up to Bischoff Avenue, and then there's an area surrounding Walgreens, which includes the Chappaqua Fire Station, Talbot's, in this area. Those are the 2 components of the study area. They're known as the Chappaqua Hamlet and the Upper Chappaqua Hamlet. So when we started talking about the comprehensive plan and then started looking at our existing code, there were several things that jumped out as needing to be addressed. We looked at, the biggest concern was in our commercial districts today, we require commercial use on the first floor throughout our business zoning. It's not just on Greeley Avenue. It's not just on King Street. It's throughout the Chappaqua Hamlet. In our business zones, you have to have commercial on the first floor. When we move from a use-based code to a form-based code, you create other elements of that code that are not just focused on use. And so put that in the back of your mind and think about that for a bit, because it will help you understand how we put this code together. When we looked at building height, we, for the first time through this process, learned through a market scan that our existing code with a 2 or 3 story height limitation, 35 feet height limitation, revealed problems when an investor wanted to obtain a return on their investment. It just wasn't possible given the height restrictions, parking requirements, and the high groundwater table in the Chappaqua Hamlet. There was also a lot of comments from everybody about the aesthetic of the hamlet, its walkability, the way the buildings looked, concern about ADA access on our sidewalks. We've addressed a lot of that with our downtown infrastructure and streetscape project, but we want to make sure that if there's development in our downtown, that we have control over the architectural detailing and the street details of projects. The approval process. We've heard for years that going through our existing approval processes are very lengthy and expensive. We wanted to study the impacts now through this GEIS process to try and alleviate the length and the expense that private applicants have to go through now. So that's why we are conducting a generic environmental impact statement on legislation, running a theoretical project to try and understand its impacts in our community. We also felt that neighbor notification was essential. Right now, if a project goes to the planning board, there's one opportunity for the public to comment. It's through a public hearing process. And you get that public hearing when you visit the Zoning Board of Appeals, when you go to the town board. Those are your touch points for public comment. We built into this form-based code a process whereby the neighbors can get in the door before the project reaches an approval stage, where they can speak with the project owner and try and accommodate, where the developer can try and accommodate the neighbors' concerns from the get-go. So we feel that we are looking at a more meaningful comment process. Form versus use. Let's talk about the actual code. Today, we have a code, as we've said before, that regulates by use. It exists in a big code book or online. It has different numbers, different pages, and it's all text. A form-based code is a little bit different. It not only has all the text and the actual words that form the legislation, but it focuses on where the building should be placed in relation to the public realm, in relation to the buildings next door. So on a first cut, we look at the form of the building. We then look at use as a secondary level of control. So we're taking the good parts of Euclidean zoning or use-based codes, and we're combining it with the form. So for the first time ever, we are looking at a code that not only talks about use, but also talks about architecture and details of the streetscape. Let's talk a little bit more about form-based code. So many people have looked at the existing code and they see things like F5, F5 minus, and F5.4. Those are known as form-based coding transects. If you look at the transects, the idea, and very much like the policy in our comprehensive plan, is you start with an urban center and you get less intense as you go out from that urban center. So if you look at F5, it's the urban center around the train station. It encapsulates our existing business areas. If you look at F4, which is up the King Street Hill, the upper Hamlet area, that is considered general urban. It is not intended to be as dense or have as much retail or commercial use as an urban center. So that's very important for you to look at the F5 and F4 as transects, very much like the BR district, the business retail district. It's an F5 district. We also, a fundamental change in the existing code relates to building height. Right now in our existing code, we allow 2 to 3 stories. We measure these stories in feet, and it's an average calculation, okay? Under the proposed code, we are looking at a story, 2 to 5 stories, and it's measured from floor to floor. So it's a story basis. When I talk about the existing code being an average calculation, it's an average. It's 35 feet as measured from the finished grade up to the midpoint of the gable on the highest roof. And it's a whole calculation that we have to go through to establish that height. A story measurement is a little more specific in that you can identify it based on building floors. And just to give you a sense of the height, this
Hey, Sabrina, can I just interrupt you for 1 second?
Sure.
I just wanted to say that back on the F5 and F4 slide, and I was going to jump in, but I didn't want to interrupt you, but I did. I just wanted to make the point that that number 5 does not specify the number of stories that a building can have. So the transect F5 does not mean 5-story buildings all up and down King Street. F4 does not mean 4-story buildings. And I think later on you're going to talk about the regulating plan, which actually does specify the number of stories.
Right. I'm actually going to address that in the next slide. I just wanted to show this picture so people understood what it is intended to do. The red line is the existing built environment in the hamlet. The blue line is what the existing code allows. Okay, so it gives you the difference of the heights. Our code also requires attractions on corners. Okay, different throughout the downtown. There are areas where they want to where the code professionals have said this is where you should have a focal point for your town. When we talk about building height, I think it's very important for people to understand we considered a lot that is particular to our hamlet. We looked at existing street widths. We looked at the King Street Hill. We looked at the Quaker Street Bridge. We looked at the Conifer Building in relation to the Quaker Street Bridge and the train tracks. And we looked at our commercial core. So as the town supervisor said, F5 in this diagram right here is a transect. The height is derived in these little green boxes that is within each of the streets, adjacent to each of the streets and the maps in the draft code. So in this F5 zone along North Greeley Avenue, the height of the building is buildings has to be between 2 and 4 stories. It can't go to 5 stories. It has to be between 2 and 4 stories. When we talk about stories, this map here is depicting where we call for 5 stories, 4 stories, and 3 stories. So, and 1 to 4 stories. So getting back to the point of the form-based code and using a transect, the urban center surrounding the train station and in relation to the Quaker Street Bridge, those are the areas of 2 to 5 story allowance. And again, considering when you're coming down the steep hill by the triangle and on town property. Along Washington Avenue up to the edge of Town Hall and the parking lot, it's restricted to 1 to 4 stories. The purple in this map is 2 to 4 stories. So in that area, there's a choice to keep a 2-story building or go to a 4-story building. And then there's an area up King Street where we're maintaining the 2 to 3 story that is very similar to the code today. Architecture and details. And as I said before, this is the first time we have a code that talks about what the street and the building relationship should be and what the building relationship between buildings should be. So for example, we have existing architecture in the hamlet. We based our code off of the existing architecture in the hamlet. We have required what's called vista terminations. So those are the special features at the corners of the buildings and other design features to make the buildings consistent with existing architecture and the things we like about the Chappaqua Hamlet. The code itself provides architectural styling, and there's guidance on facade treatment and roof elements within the code. This isn't left up to the Architectural Review Board. The Architectural Review Board was consulted when we started talking about architectural detailing. We very much wanted to provide developers and property owners an indication of the type of architecture we wanted to see. How much glass should be on the front of buildings on Greeley Avenue? How much building treatment should be on the front of buildings on Greeley Avenue? So it goes into a lot of specification that we have never had before in our code. The approval process. So right now, the existing code requires projects to go through planning board approval prior to applying for a building permit. We've talked about it before. The process with the planning board is lengthy due to the compliance with SECRA, the State Environmental Quality Review Act. It's conducted on a project-by-project basis. What we are proposing through the form-based code is going through a generic environmental impact statement now as part of adoption of the legislation to try and take away or streamline the approval process because we are already complying with SECRA. It is important to understand that if an applicant comes in and they cannot measure up to the existing code, they will still need to go to the planning board. They will still need to go to the zoning board. This process is not replacing processes throughout our existing codes. We're providing another way if you are consistent with what the community has asked for, with what the town's legislation says. And again, I have to stress, it is not a one size fits all. We're giving property owners an opportunity to show us how they measure up to the existing thresholds that we're garnering through the generic environmental impact statement process to determine whether or not they can proceed through a 3-tier review process set up in the code that will be undertaken by professional staff. They will still need to apply for a building permit, including the Architectural Review Board. If the project doesn't comply, they can go through the planning board, they can go through the zoning board, or they can go to the town board. Let's talk about neighbor notification. I started I mentioned this earlier, where right now the public has an opportunity to comment through a public hearing. The neighbor notification in the code says, property owners during what's called schematic review, it's the second of the 3-tier review that an application would go through, would be notified prior to the second stage. So it's after a concept is kind of floated around and there's a plan. That property owner has to notify with the plans all the surrounding property owners. The property owners will have an opportunity to come into town hall and address their concerns with town staff. Town staff will mediate and facilitate a review or a back and forth between the neighbors and the developer or that property owner. So as I said before, a form-based code addresses the relationship between building facades in the public realm, the form and mass of buildings in relation to one another, and the scale and types of streets and blocks. The regulation is going to consist of written words as well as a regulating plan with diagrams and other visual tools. How do you take legislation and run it through the New York State Environmental Quality Review Act? And it typically a construction project will be taken through the State Environmental Quality Review Act. Legislation typically does not require an environmental review because we imagine that this is a much wider regulation in the sense of inviting projects. We had to come up with a way to assess the proposed code in relation to SECRA. So what SECRA says is that the agencies must assess the environmental significance of all actions that they have discretion to approve, fund, or directly undertake. SECRA requires the lead agency, in this case, the town board, to balance environmental impacts with social and economic factors when deciding to approve or undertake an action. All right. And in this instance, the action is adoption of the form-based code. We have been going through the SECRA process. This kind of gives you all of the touch points that we have achieved and where we are today. There's more to go, and I will go over some of those steps at the end of the presentation tonight, but this is just to let you know that we've had to follow a process in order to review this in accordance with state regulations. Let's talk about the proposed action. So what we're talking about is an amendment of the town zoning code to change the zoning within the Chappaqua Hamlet business districts. Okay. We are looking at the 72 acres along Greeley Avenue and King Street, including areas that are currently zoned as BR, retail business, BRP, retail business parking, BD, design business, and IP, planned industrial zoning districts. We are looking for flexibility for development with the intent to revitalize the hamlet and create a sustainable and successful mix of commercial and residential uses, taking account of current and future real estate markets and trends. Okay, that's the what, where, and why. How do you study the proposed action, right? How do you study legislation? What is the maximum amount of development that could ever possibly occur under the code? And how does that development affect physical and social infrastructure environments? We had to take this legislation and convert it into a project, a build out. What is the maximum development that we could theoretically expect to occur under the code? So this is not an easy lift. This was something that we had to do to really understand what it is we are talking about and how we determine what the impacts in accordance with SECRA would be. So not only did we need to do a build out according to the form-based zoning that we're proposing, we had to go back to the existing zoning and conduct a build out for what's on our books today. We had to be able to compare apples to apples. So that's what we did. In order to develop a build out, we had to make some assumptions, okay? This is a list of the assumptions for current zoning build out. There's no moratorium. The town-owned land remains as institutional use. We looked at the existing zoning, land use, and bulk regulations. We followed the 2 to 3 story height limitation. We had to consolidate parcels in order to realize a build out under existing zoning. Recreation field does not change, that stays the same. Our important historical buildings, the Horace Greeley House stays, the Verizon utility building stays, and the post office does not change. The train station, AH Memorial Park with the landmark, remains as is. Under the proposed building build out, assumptions are very much the same. with the exception of one, no moratorium is in place, but we changed the zoning for the town-owned land to indicate future at some point development potential. We also looked at the new zoning, land use and bulk regulations and followed the height requirements of the code of 4 to 5 stories in certain instances. We had to use the same consolidation of parcels that we used under the current zoning build out to compare apples to apples. And we maintained that rec field stays, that the important buildings like the Horace Greeley House stayed, the Verizon building stayed, and the post office remained. We also increased the size of the AH Memorial Park at the train station and factored it as an improved and enlarged public open space. There was another element that we required in our proposed building assumption, that there was no net loss of municipal parking. That's very important because we did not want to lose any existing parking. When we talk about combination of parcels, today, our zoning code has been in place since the 1960s. As I said earlier, for the first time, the town conducted a market scan that said our existing height limitations combined with our need for parking, as well as the high groundwater table, does not create a return on investment that property owners felt that they could reinvest in our hamlet. And that is very much exemplified by the 17 vacancies that currently exist and the building stock and what current property owners have to go through to improve their properties to meet current health and safety standards. This map shows a combination of parcels, and it is for analysis only. The town has not had any conversations with any of these property owners about their properties or selling of their properties. It was for our analysis purposes only. The DGEIS, the Draft and Generic Environmental Impact Statement, goes through 15 different areas of study. We run the gamut of land use, through air quality and noise, cultural resources, you name it. We open up the kitchen sink and say, let's study it. Okay, so every one of these areas is discussed in the DGEIS. So each section discusses the existing condition today. We look at the anticipated impact under the theoretical maximum build-out conditions, both existing and proposed maximum, and we discuss mitigation for identified impacts of the proposed maximum build-out. So that really lays the stage for the DGEIS. As we were putting this together, I can tell you impacts were revealed in visual impacts as well as transportation impacts. As I said when I started, Thursday, October 8th, we will be drilling down on the visual and transportation impacts and what the DGEIS says. And Thursday, October 15th, we will follow up and close the public engagement discussions, these discussions with the alternatives. Right now, because it is a public engagement session, I wanted to open it up to questions and discussion. I do want to ask people to be courteous in their commenting and try not to repeat questions. I will do my best to guide you to in the DGEIS where you can find the information that you need to help you comment at the public comment period on October 20th. Ivy, do you want to add anything to that?
Nope. I just want to open it up and let people have the opportunity to speak.
Okay, great.
And you know, the whole town board is on, you know, I want to make sure that, you know, everybody is acknowledged and also feels free to, you know, chime in and speak up as well. So
I'm actually going to stop sharing right now because I do want to find another slide that I have that kind of outlines the next steps for folks. So I'm going to do that.
So Sabrina, you want me to play the role of the moderator and sort of acknowledge the people who are raising their hands?
Sure. Sure. I
Okay.
noticed there's a lot of chat, so I'm not sure,
Yeah,
as far as.
folks who were chatting over the chat function, if you want to raise your hand and be brought into the conversation, we will sort of respond to questions in real time. I was trying to sort of focus on Sabrina's presentation. So if you have a question, please go ahead and raise your hand. So Carrie, can we bring Sean Moranis into the conversation, please?
Okay, Sean, you should just unmute yourself and you can speak.
Okay, can everybody hear me?
We can hear you, Sean. Hi.
Hey, how's everybody doing? So I definitely appreciate what everybody's doing, and I recognize the problem, especially in terms of the 17 vacant storefronts. I just wanted just a couple quick things because I want to go to all the meetings, and I think that obviously I could be persuaded. I'm not like 100% against this, but just my initial thoughts. My first question is: it seems like there's this underlying argument that having people in multifamily homes in close proximity to our retail spaces and restaurants is going to, I guess, help them thrive. And I just don't really think, and I think that there are some people who definitely agree with me, that proximity is necessarily the issue here in terms of having thriving businesses. I think that we all live within probably 5 to 10 minutes of the hamlet, and I think it's more of just sort of the changing culture in retail in the country. I think that New York City, Manhattan, where everybody lives on top of each other, is probably also having a lot of these similar issues. So that's the one thing. And then the other argument I think that we could have in favor of this sort of more multifamily based housing is that just having more people, I guess there are like 18,000 people in Newcastle now, having more people in Newcastle would maybe, hold on, sorry, my phone, would create more of a, I guess, demand for services. And I think that the problem with that is it creates issues having just generally more people in the town. I think that, it ends up the single family homeowners and the property owners end up subsidizing a large part of both the local government services and also the schools. So those are sort of my big takeaways. And then with that, my question for you all is just what's going to be the process in terms of voicing objections, and how are we going to get sort of the town involved in terms of modifying it or coming up with a solution that I guess everybody, the majority of the people in the town, agree with.
I'm happy to share my screen a second. Hang on a second, because hang on a minute. Technical difficulties. To answer your question, the goal of, hang on, sorry. Is everybody seeing that slide?
Yep.
Okay. Okay, so the process. Right now, we're doing public engagement to give the community the tools it needs to comment at the public hearing on October 20th. Once the public hearing process is closed, the consultant team will prepare a final generic environmental impact statement. And that final generic environmental impact statement is based off of a response to public comments. So that will be submitted to the town, accepted by the town board. It's a little process within itself. And then the town board will make an environmental determination and issue findings. Based on the DGES, what have they found? What has the community risen that are of concern? That one will dictate either changes to the form-based code, or will create other factors to be considered as we implement the form-based code if they choose to adopt it. So after findings are made, then the town board would consider amending the form-based code and adopting the form-based code. Your question about people, okay? So right now, I know that there have been some other questions that have come up. The maximum theoretical build-out analysis has an estimate of 997 new residential units that are expected to be constructed. There is an additional 20,888 square feet of commercial area that is planned to be developed under this scenario. And we're looking at a net increase of 1,856 residents. So right now we are a community of just over 17,000 people. So that would bring us to almost 19,000 people. Over 15 years, that's the build out process, we are looking at a 10% population increase. We have actually not had an increase in population. We have actually experienced a decline in population, very small decline. But I want to tell you, the genesis is not if people come, they will live there. The idea is really twofold. To provide a diversity of housing in the community. Right now, we are primarily a community of single family homes. Okay, so we are looking for a diversity of housing type, which begets a diversity of income on housing. And we are looking to revitalize our commercial space, okay, to meet the needs of the community today. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of response to your question. I'm sure other folks on the panel would like to add some things, but that's kind of the nitty gritty.
Sabrina, just for clarity purposes, the number you just gave, roughly 1,000, that's based on it at the complete build out, correct?
Correct. The theoretical complete
Theoretical
build out.
And do we have like a time frame, like a general just sense of how long? I mean, how long that would take? I understand it's kind of like reading tea leaves, but
15 years. They had to plug
15 years.
They had to plug a time frame in, and it was 15 years.
But I want to also make it very clear, and please correct me if I'm wrong, Sabrina, that, again, that's assuming that every space is built out to the maximum, including the sale of public property, that the town could have a referendum. They're allowed to by law to challenge. So these assumptions are maximum if the town sold all their land and every single developer, let me rephrase that, every single private property owner decided to maximize the property. So that number sounds to some probably scary, but there's a lot of assumptions that get us there that require a big piece of that being this town board, the next town board or future town board sells that property. And the town agrees because ultimately they have a say in it.
Correct.
And no, though, look, and I think that there's a lot of this, sort of intuitively makes sense, but when you sort of get into the weeds a little bit, I think it might be turning, one side of the town arguably into a much sort of denser area. I mean, have we looked at like what this is going to do to Grafflin necessarily, or what this is going to, has the school board been consulted in terms of how this is going to impact whether it's Grafflin or Bell, or sort of the impact on various schools as opposed to other schools maybe not having as many children?
Yes, the DGEIS examines what's called community facilities. It talks about fire and police protection as well as school children.
And we had a conversation with over the summer. I mean, I don't remember if it was you and I or who it was with, but with the school and Christina Ackerman about the form-based code as well.
Okay, thanks, Sean. Thanks for your comments. I invite you to continue to attend the community engagement sessions. We've got a number of people with their hands raised, so I'm going to move on to our next person, which is John Yanofsky. Carrie, if you can move him into the discussion. Hi, John.
Howdy. So my main question is in regards to basically economic development, I guess, for lack of a better term. So this is obviously one piece of a puzzle, which obviously is important, is to free up any restrictions on existing land. But it sounded like you have not been really including the existing landlords and property owners downtown in this process. And I'm just wondering, once restrictions are lifted, how are we going to all of a sudden flip the switch and have the existing buildings, sold to developers and really kind of, this plan put into place when it's all encumbered?
I don't know if that's accurate, and please, Sabrina, jump in and tell me if I'm wrong, but there have been conversations with the existing landowners, very much so. And they've been involved in the process, very much so, and have had the opportunity to get involved further in the process. And I don't know, John, if it's the intention of everyone to see that, I'll use the term developers, buy up all these individual properties and make large developments, for lack of a better term. One of the things that we're trying to do, and please other people join in if they disagree, I'm saying it wrong, is that existing small property owners can develop their own personal property, not necessarily that it's done with a huge mega buy the whole block and build it out. So I don't think your assumption or your basis there is accurate. We have engaged them. We continue to engage them. Many of them, at least anyone I've spoken with, they seem to be positive and for this development. And I use the term developer again as a sole property owner or a larger business, but they are on board, and it's trying to incentivize them to enhance their property too.
Right. I guess I must have misunderstood what Sabrina had said then. I mean, I guess the point I'm trying to ask of you guys is, once this new code is in place, what are the next steps in the economic redevelopment plan for the town to attract commerce, business, et cetera, to come into town? I mean, how is that going to alleviate the 17 vacant building or storefronts that we currently have?
Ivy, I'm sorry, you're about to say
No,
something.
go ahead.
I think certainly market forces are going to dictate what happens, and we can make this as inviting as we want to make it, right? And if the economy is not where it needs to be, or I'll use the term big developer or current owner who will develop, if there's no incentive or economic reason for them to do it, then they're not going to do it. So if building, we'll use that number Sabrina even mentioned before, in this maximum scenario of 1,000 more people in the hamlet, if there's not 1,000 people who want to squeeze into the hamlet, or be here, then no one's going to build out for that purpose. If the retail is not going to come here because retail is hurting everywhere for whatever reason, it's not going to change, or is going to change, whether it's COVID, whether it's the internet, it's not, they're not going to build to accommodate something that's not coming. So I think this is just
Right.
and I believe there's probably people, not probably, there's certainly people a lot smarter than I am who know how to market the community and generate development from an economic standpoint. So I don't have all those answers, unfortunately.
Right, and
Okay.
I would just add that this is not the end game, but this is the next critical step that we need to take in terms of reviving the hamlet. We know that we need more feet on the street. We need more people living and walking around our downtown area in order to sustain the businesses that cannot stay in business today. We know that there are property owners that want to be able to develop their properties in order to be able to, sort of maximize the revenue that they may be able to take in from a combination of retail plus residential, and they are restricted in what they can do today. We know that there are uses that we want to be able to consider that are not allowed today, where we are strictly limited to the retail use in the hamlet today. So, this then opens up possibilities that don't exist today. But John, you make an excellent observation, which is that this does not do it on its own, and it is part of the town's continuing economic development program. But it is a critical step in that.
No, that makes sense.
And I want to add one other piece, and I know we do want to move on to someone else. Just as an example, and not that the town takes a position one way or another, the Rite Aid store has been vacant for, I can't even remember now how long it's been vacant.
As
And
long as our moratorium.
yeah, well, even before that, I think it started. But make a long story short, I'm not my comment on whether a dollar store should be here or not. But if that landowner, if that's the best he can do with that property, there's no incentive for him to fix up that property, expand that property, make it more modern. We're just going to have more of the same type of tenant there. But why not give that landowner the opportunity to make more of that property?
Makes sense.
And that helps the value for the community at large, you're right. The taxes may not make it, wow, it's also going to blow it out of the water when all this tax revenue or the number of people here are not going to make all of a sudden every business viable and survive. But why not give these landowners, like the owner of the Susan Lawrence building, to go up another story or so if he thinks that he can develop it and it could be a better benefit to the town. So this allows them to do things like that, and while also maintaining some sort of consistency too in design and form.
No, that makes sense. Thank you.
John, thank you very much. I'm going to move forward. Our next person who's raising their hand is Robin Klein. If we can move Robin into the conversation.
Mute. Hi. I want to follow up on the component of the question that asked about the residential units and your conversations with the school. My understanding is that if you're building these residential units, they're going to be taxed in some ways similar to the whole Reader's Digest discussion, fee simple, and that there's going to be a significant gap in the tax revenue for these fee simple units versus what it costs to educate a student in our school system. And have you looked at the impact in the projected number of children that would enter the school, the tax revenue associated with the units versus the cost to put those children in our school system, and how that tax gap would be addressed?
Yes. Sabrina, you want to answer the question?
So I'm going to answer the question. The DGEIS does go into that. The estimated number of students under the maximum build out analysis was 114 school-age children. It was a net increase of 96 children based on what we see today in migration and out migration. And it's estimated to be about 6 to 7 students per year, 1 in each grade. As far as tax generation, we were able to identify that today, in the hamlet, the commercial area of the hamlet, roughly almost $3 million of taxes were generated. And that was based off of 2019 numbers, approximately 288,721 square feet of existing commercial space and 107 residences or residential units that are in the study area. In order to determine, we cannot determine exact tax generation with 20,000 or 21,000 additional commercial space. It is really relative to what the space is being used at, but we know that it is a nominal amount compared to the tax generation today. I don't know if that answers in totality, but I will tell you the DGEIS in section 3H identifies and talks about the school impact and the tax generation.
Well, I'm still unclear on how we make up the gap between the fee simple on residential units and the approximately $30,000 it costs to educate a child in the Chappaqua school systems today. I think, for me, it just harkens to some of the concerns that we had in building out the residential units at Reader's Digest and its impact on school revenue, traffic, etc.
Well, also, I want to throw in too, one of the things we're failing to recognize, and those numbers are the maximum build out with the public property being sold. But one would assume that some of these buildings, for perspective, you're going to lose current homeowners who are paying $35,000 in property taxes a year and are empty nesters who want to stay in Newcastle and would now be walkable in downtown. And then a family moves into that home, so there's a transition out. So not all of these properties are going to be used by people who are bringing a child into the school system. So the numbers are, when I say scary, they seem larger than they are, because again, you're assuming something that I don't believe will come to fruition anytime soon, if ever at all.
Okay, Robin, thank you very much for your question. I'm going to move forward. The next attendee who has their hand raised is Lynn Lambert.
Lynn, you'll just need to unmute yourself.
I just figured out how to do it. Thank you. I'm gonna I've got a lot of questions, but in order to save some time, I'm gonna rush through just a few things, including some comments, because you've been telling us you're gonna listen with an open heart. And so I want to tell you with my open heart some of my feelings here. Unfortunately, I don't feel that the most of the residents know what's going on here. And when they start to hear about it, they're shocked. And that's on us because we weren't paying enough attention. And I can count myself as guilty here. But regardless of that, I don't think if you took a poll, people would say that they wanted to completely change the look of our downtown. We moved here for a sleepy little hamlet. We had the choice of places like Mount Kisco, which had plenty more shopping, and Pleasantville and other charming communities. And I don't think we want to get into the business of trying to compete with them. I think the 3-story limit that we have right now would serve us very well. And without it, I think it's going to look completely different. The density is not going to be pleasant. And just the visual from the moment you get off the train is going to be different. And it makes me sad. I am in a business that deals with retail all the time, and retail is struggling. It's struggling everywhere. I also don't think it's going to be a successful idea to try to compete for retail with all these other communities, but who knows? Because right now with COVID, retail it was suffering before, it's dying right now. And where we will be at after COVID is something that I think we ought to take a pause and take it in, and maybe get a retail consultant to say, what can we do that would really speak to our community for retail now that this time has given us some lessons. Right now, we don't have the lessons because we're still in the middle of it. So those are the comments. And then the questions are the cohesive design idea. It sounds really good, but I don't know how it would possibly work for us, except that somebody would build a 4 or 5 story building downtown, and next to it there would still be a 1-story building, or 2 1-story buildings, or 2 1-story buildings and a 2-story building. For a while, at least maybe a long while, unless a developer really does come in and buy up everybody's property on one side of a block, it's going to look what I call snaggletooth. It's going to be unattractive. You're also going to be displacing the businesses who are there now. God, how sad is that going to be? Yeah, if you're going to come and tear a place down or have significant construction going on above, you know, when the yoga studio opened, they had to do the construction. They you know, that storefront had to stay closed for safety purposes. So all in all, I think that's problematic, and a bunch of construction anyway is going to be harmful in the near term for several years at least, to the retailers we've already harmed through the construction we have. So that's a concern. And let's see, I just have one more thing. Yeah, so there's just no assurance that anything we do right now is going to help fill any of those 17 empty storefronts. And what I heard was that across from Walgreens, that building is struggling so hard to fill their storefronts on the bottom floor that they're asking for permission to be able to make it into housing instead. I don't know if that's true or not. You guys may know. And even for their housing, in terms of bringing in more diversity of costs, it's expensive to build. And that building is charging $4,000 a month rent for a 2-bedroom apartment in the stories that they're already allowed to use for housing. So I don't know how we reassure that we're going to get a diversity of rental pricing. So sorry, that's a lot. I appreciate your patience. Again, I'm very respectful of all the work that this board and our town employees have put into developing this. And again, it's my bad and others in the community's bad that we weren't following it along the way. But what it feels like is nobody asked us if we wanted the town to look completely different or feel completely different. And that's what this would be. And that makes me sad, and it's troubling, and I think it's troubling to others. Thank you very much.
I don't want to jump in first. I'm monopolizing. If anyone wants to jump in front of me.
Here.
My sort of response to that is, I think what you're saying, Lynn, is fair, not within reason, it's fair. But I've also said, and I think most would agree, the time stands still for no one. And as we say, we don't want to see a change to X and whatever that means. And you called it snaggletooth and construction. No one also wants to come over the sawmill and still see just empty ragtag buildings that no one's doing anything with because there's no incentive to do anything with them, and they're empty storefronts. That's not going to help the community either. And I think that, again, I know that this isn't a development plan, and there's a misnomer that all of a sudden the streets are going to get ripped up again and there's going to be construction everywhere. If what we're saying is true, which is COVID is a horrible thing for all business, and if people can't rent out what's there now with this new development across Walgreens, if that's true, then what person is going to build up, and what developers, as that scary, frightening term is going to come in and just start building? So, the market's going to ensure that it controls what happens within reason. And whether or not we set the form and the setbacks and the way things look and the consistency now is not going to change for something later on. It's going to maintain that bucolic New Englandishy look of the hamlet. So I only disagree because I think we share the same principle and belief, but it's keeping it now the way it is guaranteed to fail, in my view. It's guaranteed it will fail, and then it hurts everybody. So if this is going to grow and expand, and there is going to be construction over the next 15 years in pieces or in large scale, we have to find a way to make it work. That's my view.
Can you talk? My husband is here with me. He also wants to say something, if that's all right.
If I can I don't mean to interrupt, but I do want to remind people who are listening to please try and comment regarding the content of the code and the DGEIS. There will be a public hearing on October 20th where you can comment again.
I understand there'll be a public meeting. One of the questions I have is, will there be a public vote on this?
No,
Oh, sorry.
no, this is legislation that we're talking about passing, and that's what the town board does, is we have a legislative process, and the town board will be voting on whether to adopt this legislation.
I don't agree necessarily that volume equals retail success. A couple of thoughts about that regarding retail, Amazon. A couple of thoughts about that, the death of malls. As far as residential character goes, the words that have been tossed around have been hamlet, bucolic, and tonight a quaint feel. I do not, in my humble opinion, think that anything with 5 stories, 4 stories is going to add to that regarding feeling of the town. I watched a long presentation where I think his name is Mr. Kirkwood. I believe he's the head of one of the groups here. He suggested that the public really hasn't had a chance to give their opinions. And he's stated that in his experience, if the public doesn't have a chance to give opinions, there are very many issues. You talk about the surrounding villages revitalizing. How do you know that the outcome of their work is going to revitalize their towns? One of the things that I don't understand is, what's the rush? We already have three buildings, or rather 3 groups building: Conifer, Chappaqua Crossing, which I hear, and please correct me if I'm wrong, it has not filled their quota, and the building near Quaker Hill. Why don't we wait and see what happens with those buildings and those projects before we go ahead and do these major changes? You talk about
Interrupt you 1 second, just because we have a lot of people who need to speak, and I'm sorry, I mean, no disrespect. I think the very short response is, this isn't a building development plan. This is just a code change. That's it. It's zoning. It's not to build. It's not a construction plan as other things are building out. This is solely a zoning change that may see no change in terms of construction for days, months, or years. So I think
it's a zoning change that will lead to development. If I'm a developer and I have the option of building 2, 3, 4, or 5 stories, certainly from my return on investment, I'm going to build 5 stories.
assuming that the market will bear it. But if there's, again.
So I'm actually, I want to, we have 11 people with their hands raised right now.
I'm going to, yes, that's fine. I just wanted to make these points. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next person who has their hand raised is Arlie Bennett.
Sorry.
While Arlie comes online, I'd like to clarify, October 20th is the opening of the public hearing. During the timeframe of the public hearing, the town board will accept not only public comment at the public hearing, but also written correspondence from people who may not have an opportunity to attend on October 20th. So I wanted to clarify that for folks. It's not just the one day at a meeting.
Hi, thank you. I do really appreciate all the work that you guys have put in to develop this. I'd like to thank Ms. Lambert for her statement, pointing out that unfortunately it was sorted to blame on residents not being so aware of this happening. Secondly, I thought the dollar store was already locked in, so I'd already let that go a while ago. In regards to the legislature point, all of you that are going to be voting on this 15-year plan, where are you going to be in 15 years? Are you planning on you want to be in an overly busy town? I really don't understand how an additional 1,000 residents, also the vacant spaces in Chappaqua Crossing, are going to increase retail spaces and traffic when there's already 17 spaces that are vacant. What development is a myth, like you think that you're doing good when you develop. It's a myth. Like, you're potentially going to be ruining a town. I don't understand what is driving the proposal of developing the hamlet. Why can't you figure out another place to put the residential spaces?
Well,
let me just finish. This will fundamentally change the look and feel of the town. It will completely destroy the historical patina that will be erased. Even before COVID, for families like mine that have been here for 30 plus years, there's some that have been here 40, 50, 60, 70, 80 plus years. Before COVID, retail spaces really didn't draw many visitors. And it was kind of something that we understood. Retailers would take a jab at it. A lot of people say the rent is too high. I don't necessarily disagree with them. But relying on an increase of population by 1,000 people with the proposed development of residential spaces, like, how do you honestly think that that's gonna do anything to improve? That's all. At this point, like, I'm at a loss of words. Like, I think I see maybe one person on this board that's been in the town for over 25 years, Ms. Shapiro, I think. But aside from that, like, you guys got to live in this town. Stop changing it because you think that's going to improve it. It's not.
I'm going to jump in for a second, and with all due respect, and that's usually not meant to be in a respectful way, because you're attacking us for saying that we haven't been here long enough because your family has been here longer. Maybe I've been here since 2004, so 14 years isn't enough. I have a kid in high school, middle school, elementary school. I volunteered in this community almost within a year that I've been here. So I think let's take a step back and realize that we all want to see this town succeed, whether your grandparents have been here or you just moved here yesterday. I appreciate your comments in terms of your concern, but the answer is in my view that we're not going to be destroying it as you believe we are. It's not a matter of us saying we have to have more residents and residential. We are trying to say, how can we fix the hamlet to make it more appealing for growth and development in terms of succeeding? So very general, vague statements, but it's not just we're trying to find places to build. We are trying to fix the hamlet because it will fail. And to say that we've kind of accepted, or you've accepted that the rent is too high and businesses won't succeed and they take jabs at it, that's not okay. We're trying to figure out how to make it work. So that's my comment, and I'll now pass it on.
Thank you. The next participant who has their hand raised is Rachel Dubin.
Rachel, you just need to unmute.
Yeah, I just did that. I just wanted to say thank you. I think it's a great plan. I think it's really forward thinking. I've only been here for 5 years, but I just wanted to say that some of the things that I think are missing from the community, the ability to create a more vibrant downtown, the ability to add diversity in terms of socioeconomics and racially as well, are very much needed. And so thank you all for your time and your commitment. And I know there's other people in the town that would support this, and I'll do my best to get them to turn out at future meetings.
Thanks for your comment, Rachel. The next person with their hand raised, Chris Hildenbrand.
Hey, thanks so much. Appreciate the time. So, you guys hit on a few key points. You mentioned obviously the form-based code giving you more flexibility, the SECRA process. You talked about revitalizing the hamlet, diversifying housing. I asked this question maybe on Facebook, but if the 17,000 residents woke up tomorrow and drove into downtown and saw the town that is presented in some of the renderings, would they say, oh yeah, sure, that's exactly what we voted for? And I know, that's the max build out, but that's what we should all expect. And, I guess the point is what's motivating us to be so determined to, quote, revitalize the hamlet and to create, quote, diversity of housing to lead to that outcome, which someone, I think Lynn said, could be a snaggletooth. I say it looks like downtown Portchester, and so what is the motivation for that? And I guess you are the legislature, Ivy, for sure. And this is not a plebiscite, system. We get that. But if the 17,000 residents don't have a real idea, then whether it's their fault for not paying attention or the board's fault for not going door to door and communicating it, I think more outreach is necessary before we move forward. Those are my 3 cents. Thank you for listening.
Well, thank you, Chris. Jeremy?
Chris, I think that some of that what you say is fair. We always can do better, right? In letting people know and advising people. I can only, we've all been involved in this. I know when Ivy, Jason, and I ran, that was one of our platform pieces. But Lisa was involved with it before, as was I, as was Ivy under the previous administration. So we've all had a hand in this in some way. But if everyone came downtown and saw that maximum build out, then the response, Chris, is that they would want that because there'd be a right to have a public referendum to challenge that maximum build out. And if the town said, okay, then that would mean they would actually want it. Because as you probably know, I'm sure you know, when there was that little issue over the lease at the train station restaurant, there was enough people to come out to say, no, we want to overturn that in the referendum, and then it had to be released. So this would be a heck of a lot bigger scale. And then on the flip of it, we're all responsible for not being involved enough because look how many people turn out to vote. Look how many people get involved with regularity. They unfortunately, that's even how many people here tonight, 60 attendees, when this has been out there on Facebook and you have a lot of people signing the petition. So some of it is on us, some of it is on as leaders, some of it is on the community, but we're doing our best to do what we think is right. We're open to the listening. We're open to these conversations, but that's what I'm saying. Sorry.
And I just want to say, and just to add on to that, Jeremy, and also in response to the previous comment, you know, what we're trying to do here is very much in line with the implementation of the 2017 comprehensive plan, which was based on extensive community outreach. This is what the community told us. They told us, we don't want development in residential neighborhoods. We want you to center development in our hamlets. We want you to center development where there is existing infrastructure that can support it. We want to be able to create housing to meet the needs of young families who are not yet ready to buy their first home, who want to move into our community. We want to be able to create housing to support empty nesters who want to be able to stay in our community. This form-based code doesn't come out of the work of this town board. This form-based code is really our effort to implement what you have told us you want for this community. So with that said, we'll move on to the next person with their hand raised, and that's Larry Rose. Hi, Larry.
Hi, how are you?
Good, thanks.
Good. So thank you, first of all, to everyone on the board. You guys have sometimes a thankless job, and you're handling it and doing a great job, I think. And also appreciate your time on this and all the other matters that you handle that most of us don't even see or know about. So thank you for that. I had a couple of questions and a couple of things I'd like to see if you could clarify. When you talked about going through the secret process now, does that mean if a developer comes in and buys a parcel and let's say does an assemblage, gets 10 properties, buys the corner across from Starbucks and now wants to develop a large project, does that project need to go through SECRA on its own? Or does the fact that you did this form-based SECRA process exempt it going forward?
Do you want me to answer that?
Yeah, answer that one. I have a couple of questions.
Right. So the intention is if there's a developer who buys a block of land and wants to have a project, they will need to demonstrate consistency that they are within the thresholds of the environmental impact statement that the town board is considering now. And what that means is how much wastewater are you anticipating to use in your development? Can you park the number of cars required in accordance with the code in your development? If there are no other impacts that have not already been analyzed by the town board, then he's already complied with, or she has already complied with SECRA.
So does that mean that if you, because you threw out a number at the beginning or early on in this presentation, and frankly, this was the first time I had seen it, and I had just seen an email on Facebook about it, so I figured I'd come check it out. Do you have, I think you said something like there was going to be 1,800, if this thing was a max out build, it would be 1,800 new residents. Is that right?
That was the estimate.
And is that estimate based on a number of units? Like how many apartments is that? And how many?
197 new residential units.
What'd you say, 197?
997.
997 new units. And does that 997 new units come with a breakdown of 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms? Because how you break down that square footage, it's almost like saying we're building 1 million square feet of, if you assume for argument's sake, because we're all just basing this on generalities, 1,000 square feet per unit. And now you're saying we're having 997 of them. That means you're going to have 997,000 square feet of new residential development. I'm just using your numbers and applying a very reasonable square footage. Is that right?
And what I'm doing is highlighting for you the highlights within the draft generic environmental impact statement, which actually includes more detail and more analysis than I can present to you tonight.
Oh, of course. No, I totally
Right.
understand.
Right. And so understandably, there is a different mix. And so under the maximum theoretical build out, we had to kind of put some assumptions in place and make sure those assumptions were consistent with the maximum build out under the existing code today, so we could compare apples to apples and understand what the thresholds were.
Right. I guess the only difference there is based on what you presented, when you talked about maxing out the existing code versus maxing out what we're proposing. And by the way, I totally buy into the idea of you want more density downtown. Like, I'm not against this in terms of, the way you're laying it out. I just want to make sure for myself and everyone else on this call, you throw out numbers. Well, now everyone's kind of walking home saying, okay, now we know it's going to be 1 million, plus or minus 1 million square feet of new residential building. That's fine, but let's just be clear that that's what these assumptions kind of lead you to. So when you had talked at the very beginning, you showed a slide and you said, these are the assumptions based on maxing out the existing form code. And now here are the assumptions based on the new code. Probably the biggest difference between the two in the 30 seconds it was up was the new one had town-owned land, including in the changing zoning. So I guess the question there, and this is all just for, just so that, not so much transparency, but just so that it's clarifying it, how much land are we talking about is the town land that, would not, it wasn't included in the first one, but is included in the second one?
So the town owns approximately 20 acres within the 72-acre study area. The alternatives discussion at our third public engagement session will be reviewing the alternatives to the proposed action, where we will dig deeper into what the development potential on town-owned land, if that was ever to be determined to move forward, would be. So I can't answer you right here, right now, because I don't have the facts and figures in front of me talking on the screen.
Yeah, no, you answered what I want to know. So it's 20 acres. So if we're looking at 72 acres overall, a quarter of it, maybe more, or around that is what. So is there so I guess, so this is where I kind of get to my question now that I kind of understand that. What's the rationale for including the town land in this proposed form-based zoning?
Sabrina, you want to go? You want me to go?
I mean, I'm happy to go. The inclusion of the town land is based off of the comprehensive plan and planning principles, which talk about utilizing the existing train station as a center, increasing the open space outside of the train station, and using the surface parking lots, which are already built upon, for higher intensity use. It also is under another layer of control, but the intention is to really look at if there is a future for additional use of town-owned property.
I think we all recognize that the current use of the town-owned land, which is primarily the train station parking lot, is perhaps not the highest and best use of that property. 9 acres of paved parking lot may not be the best use of that property. Whether that means that we move towards a different use now versus 15, 20 years from now remains to be seen. But currently, that town-owned property, that parking lot, is zoned as industrial. And so when we undertake the form-based code and we change the zoning for the Chappaqua Hamlet, changing the zoning from zoned industrial, which is what exists today, into something that makes sense and then positions us to be able to do something that is a higher and more effective and efficient use of that property in the future, makes sense and saves money for the town. So Larry, I'm gonna actually cut you off. You've got great questions. I hope you'll continue to come to our community engagement sessions. I hope you'll also dig into the details of the DGEIS, which has a lot of facts and figures and numbers and alternatives that you're going to want to look at, including an alternative that looks at what if we did not include town-owned property as a part of our form-based code district. Okay, so the next person we are bringing into the call is Eileen Gallagher.
Okay, I think I'm on. Hello?
You're on.
Hi, everybody. Thank you all for your hard work. I do somewhat know of the efforts that you all put in, and it is appreciated. I just have some questions. Now that I'm listening to questions, and I had a question in the beginning, but now I have a few more, so please bear with me. If this zoning were to be voted by the town board, does that mean that after that zoning change, there would be no further public input? So you make that zoning change and say someone wants to come in and put three in a row, 5-story buildings. That means that that public input is gone?
Oh, because there's also a neighbor notification piece as well.
I'm sorry, so what does that mean?
So what it means is that if a project is located, somebody purchases property and wants to develop a 5-story building where the Citibank building is right now, because that's the only area under one of the 2 areas under private property ownership right now that are calling for that can go up to 5 stories. So let's say somebody purchases that property and wants to put a 5-story building in. All of the surrounding property owners to that property will be notified of that building and invited to come in and speak to the development department about the project.
So that's kind of like if, the way residential is now, if your neighbor, say, wants to put in, I don't know, I'm just guessing, like a swimming pool or something, then the nearby neighbors would be able to comment, right? Is that similar?
Correct.
So what my concern is that if you, instead of on a case-by-case basis, if you do put in this form-based code, then the community input, like you pointed out, and there was a lot of community input about the restaurant at the train station, which is a good thing. I think more input is better. I know it can be messy and difficult, but I think more input is better. But in this case, the community input would be gone. It would just be the neighbors, you're saying?
Yes.
Yeah, all right.
But
That's
for clarity, hold on, Eileen, for clarity, just if I caught your question right, you talking about the referendum, you couldn't have a referendum on someone's private property.
No. I was trying to, in my mind, kind of compare that if you're saying that a building, there was a proposal for a 5-story building, that the neighbors.
Eileen, your time right now is now to comment on 5 stories at that location.
Before the form-based code.
Yeah, as part of this process.
Okay. The second thing, you mentioned that there were 1,000 potential units for maximum build out, but you were estimating only 96 new students. I just want to make sure I had those numbers right. 96 new students to the school system?
Again, I can go through and get you specifics on it, but it is studied in the DGEIS.
And
go ahead.
Speaking of the school system, I know someone had mentioned that someone had spoken with Christine Ackerman, who's the superintendent, but has there been consultation with the school board regarding this whole development?
Yes.
They were part of that conversation.
The school district and the school board, correct me if I'm wrong, Sabrina, are both listed as interested parties and have been in receipt of the drafts of our form-based code in order to provide input into the development of the scoping document for the DGEIS. And they will receive the results of the DGEIS. I believe they actually already have when we approved the DGEIS last week on Friday. So yes, they have been consulted and have been a part of this process.
Okay. When we talked about, because I know I took part in the community study from, I guess you said it was back in 2017, how time flies. I wish we could go back to that year, but it was said that people were very concerned about the bucolic nature of town. I personally, first off, do you know how many people took part in that study?
Yes, I don't have that off the top of my head, but we have records of everybody who attended the public meetings and dialogue with us, yes.
I mean, would you say like it was like 1,000 people or 100 people or?
Off the top, if I had to give a number, I'd say it was probably 600 people.
Okay. My take on it in all the groups that I sat in, because if anybody wasn't part of that, we had different groups that we sat and talked and put our input and whatever. People that I heard speaking and quite passionately, when people talked about the bucolic nature of the town, I think just to say the neighborhoods is slightly off. In my mind, I know people, especially, I know the town historian and his wife and some other of the older residents were very concerned about the nature of the downtown, because when you're thinking about moving to Newcastle, I don't think people take it as, oh, I like my little street, my neighborhood, whatever. I think that the whole downtown is part of that. So when people talk about the bucolic nature, I think they mean, yes, when you're driving into Newcastle and especially downtown Chappaqua, I think that's kind of what they mean. You see open space, you see the little pocket parks. It's a less city-like environment than it seems that some of these depictions are leading us to be concerned about.
Yeah. So Eileen, thank you for that comment. I'm not sure if you were on the top of the call when I talked about the importance of the 2017 comprehensive plan to the form-based code effort. But that comprehensive plan talks about not locating future development in residential neighborhoods. And I quoted at the top, and I don't have it in front of me right now, so I apologize. I'm not going to quote it back to you now. But I quoted the document wherein, the town specifically calls for development in the hamlets where infrastructure is located in order to meet the housing needs that we identified as a part of the comprehensive plan. So I'm gonna ask you to please send us any additional comments over email. I've got 10 people with their hands raised and we're already over time. So thank you, Eileen.
Oh, just quick question, does the public see when people send in written comments about this? Do the public get to see those? And how would we see them?
So this meeting this evening is not actually our public hearing. The comments that we collect as a part of the public hearing will be available through the town clerk's office, as all of our public comments are for the hearings that the town board holds.
You have to request them.
Correct.
Thank you.
The next person we have is Alexander Eichenberger.
Yes, hi, how are you doing? Can you hear me?
I can. I'm sorry if I butchered your name.
That's okay. It's French. It's a German name. I speak French mostly, and I'm in the States, so it's absolutely no problem. So when I looked at what you were saying, I have no idea of what your intentions, but what you presented, I think, was generally interesting. So you said your pitch was you want a unified plan because you like things to look more alike. Then you wanted to revitalize a business. I mean, it's really hard to object against this. And the third one, you want a simplification of the approval process. And that in general, that sounds probably pretty good, with the exception, I think that some people were worried that once this goes, there's less feedback from the regular people. But then my question is the following. Let's take an absurd case. So let's say you go, because you have specific numbers. So you say 5 stories here, 4 stories there. So let's say, why not 10-story building everywhere? And so then basically, or you can go the reverse. You can say, okay, I want just a single-story floor. And so then the question is, how did you come up with your answers? And so if I look at your 3 pitches, which was unified plan, business revitalization, and simplification of process, if you were too aggressive, let's say 15-story tall, I would say that probably you're going to have a very jagged style because, I mean, some are going to be very big, some are very small. So that would be kind of not what you want. And then you say business revitalization. I mean, I'm priced out of most of the shops downtown. So I'm part of the 17,000 that never shops downtown. So I don't know if you were to add 3,000 people in apartments, if that's really the kind of people that you think will buy the thing that I currently installed there. So, you know, I mean, maybe it works, maybe it doesn't work. So that's my question to you. And then I think the simplification of the process, whether you're too aggressive or too not aggressive enough, that wouldn't make it really a difference. So my question to you is like, you know, how do you come to 5? I think a lot of people are a little bit afraid of the nature of the quaintness. And I think, I mean, understand as you say, business people wants to have as tall a building. So, I mean, we could say, okay, we could have as tall a business until people really scream. And is that where you're going? Or you know, just like, try to inform us on why the 5, why not 4, why not 3? You know, I think that's because your goals are kind of okay, but I think in the current form, I think a lot of people seems a little bit disturbed.
So thank you for asking that question, because I think it's a critical piece of information that I wish we had included in the presentation. So when we came up with the height limitations that are included in the current version of the form-based code, that is based on work that the Downtown Working Group did with our expert consultants, who looked at the return on investment that would be needed on properties in order for the property owner to want to redevelop the property. So they did a complicated analysis, and I'm not going to get all of the right information or say all of the right words here, but basically they did an economic analysis that led them to the recommendation to the town that certain blocks should be 5-story, certain blocks should be 4-story, certain blocks should be 3-story, in order for those property owners to be able to make a return on their investment that would incentivize them to redevelop those properties. That said, it's incumbent upon us to counterbalance that with what we believe is acceptable to this community and what we think is consistent with the character of the hamlet and the community at large. And so you will actually see that one of the things that's studied in the DGIS as an alternative to the current version of the code is an alternative that talks about limiting the height to a maximum of 4 stories as opposed to allowing 5 stories. And that's actually something that the town board specifically requested because we wanted to test out that theory, to test out whether we needed to have 5 stories in town in order for there to be a return on investment and so on. So one of the alternatives that we will be looking at as we continue in the DGEIS and moving towards the final EIS is that alternative with regard to height. But you're exactly right. And thank you for asking that, because it's not as though we, the town board, sat down and said, you know what, it would look awesome if we had 5-story buildings in town. Not at all. We did a very extensive and comprehensive economic analysis that led to that recommendation.
No, so and I think that's great, but I would venture that potentially if you go too high, so you may negate the actual objective that you had, which was a more unified because of the jagged place, and also the businesses, because it may not be really the added person that really are driving the business, because we already have 17,000 and they're failing, and if we are 19. So in any case, so I think it's good to hear that you're at the very least open on you know, the 5 versus 4 versus 3. And I think keeping with the objectives in mind and also what the community accept, I think would be really great. Thank you.
So I just thank you very much for that comment. I want to point out we've got a number of people with their hands raised and we're already over the 90 minutes. I hate to cut people off. But so what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to take everybody who has their hand raised at this time. But if I can ask you to please limit your comment or your question to 2 to 3 minutes, I would appreciate that. And there are going to be lots of opportunities to continue to engage with us. This is the first of 3 of these sessions, and you can call us and you can email us, and Sabrina will sit down with you. If you're a face-to-face person, I hate to cut off good conversation, but we've got to keep it moving. At least I do, because I got to go put my daughter to bed. So the next person who has their hand raised is Lori Morton.
Hi, guys. This has been really interesting and fun. And I have enjoyed listening to the comments and how passionate people are about downtown. It's wonderful. So a couple of thoughts. Certainly one of the elements that I like about this is thinking about it as, you know, an opportunity to prevent decay of downtown buildings for which there is not incentive to refresh the current structure. That this might provide some incentive to, you know, to turn something that is not architecturally interesting and decaying into something that might drive some commercial interest downtown. But that building, of course, would be driven by market needs. Obviously, no one's going to make the investment to build a structure that they can't rent. So, you know, so I think that in itself puts some restraint on the outcome of this rezoning because, you know, because it would be driven by whether the market could sustain that construction. And I think when folks are considering, well, the landscape is changing dramatically post-COVID and the way that people use the town and commute is changing, I would imagine that a developer would take that into consideration as well in planning a new project. I do also really like, you know, some diversity in housing opportunities in town for our retirees, single parents, starter homes for young people who we lose now, and limit, I think, the diversity of people who live in Chappaqua and Newcastle in general. I do have a question about individual proposals. And so once the code is passed, and this is kind of related to what Eileen was getting at, and a development proposal is put forth, and there's a notification of adjacent neighbors, presumably because they're stakeholders in the project. I'm not really understanding why that notification would not extend to the public as well, who would also be stakeholders in our downtown. So I'm hoping I might get an explanation for that. I could appreciate that a community member who was not an adjacent neighbor, who was turning up, let's say, for a hearing on an individual project to object to a component of the project that was allowable by the code, wouldn't make a lot of sense, but perhaps there might be some other aspect of that proposal that was objectionable to the community.
Sabrina, do you want to discuss that?
I think that is a comment that it's a great comment, and I think that that's something that the town board should consider. I don't have a particular response for that tonight, but I think that it is a comment. We've heard a lot about the notification process that's built into the code, and we've made changes based on things that we've heard up until the DGEIS was put in place. And again, this is an opportunity to consider comments and make changes accordingly. So I think with that comment in mind, the town board may want to have a further discussion on it, but I don't want to belabor discussion about that at this point, but it's a good comment.
Great. I had another really short question. Sorry, Jill. And that is, does the form-based code help to limit the town's exposure to lawsuits with developers where a developer might not fully mature a project and then run into roadblocks, and that you might actually remove some points of contention in the initiation of a new project that could limit chances of lawsuits down the road?
I don't know the answer to that question. So we are taking notes on all the questions tonight. So that's one that we'll have to get back to you on. Thanks, Lori. The next person who has their hand raised is Warren Messner.
There we go. I think I'm unmuted. So thank you so much for holding the session. Thanks, Robin Klein and Sean Marinas, for initiating the conversation regarding the school district. Sabrina, early in the presentation, you mentioned a lot of groups that you had discussed this with, but didn't mention the schools. After some discussion, you said schools were included. I understand the district is an interested party on the documents that are sent out, but no one from the town has initiated a conversation with anyone on the board that I know of.
That's not true, Warren. We've had meetings with
Well,
the
I was
school
part of-
board.
Yeah,
Well, can you let me finish, please? Who'd you have a conversation with?
Sabrina, who from the school board attended this thing?
I'd have to pull out the attendance sheets of that. Jill, do you recall? You're on mute, Jill.
Jane Shepherdson certainly was on the call. And I really don't.
We can go back. We can go back and get you the.
But Jane Shepherdson was in fact president of the school board at the time we had the conversation.
Was Ms. Tripp on there as well?
That was a year ago? Okay.
I was not doing this
This was
summer.
a couple of weeks ago.
No, it was the summer. We had a Zoom meeting with them.
Yes, we did. We did.
Yeah, I was.
Who was on the call, Jeremy? Do you remember?
I think as Jill was right. Was there? I honestly, and Miss Ackerman and Dr. Ackerman and Miss Tripp.
I thought Jane Shepherdson, but I would have to check my notes.
I guess we'll have to check.
Yep.
Just because I guess I was initially surprised that you hadn't mentioned school until Sean and Robin mentioned that. The one thing that I'm concerned about as a board member and as a fiduciary of the district is that you said there are going to be 997 apartments, but only 96 additional students. These numbers seem off based on the estimates that we always receive from Chappaqua Crossing, where, if we look at our district, 50% of the town doesn't have children in the district. So if you take 50% of the 997 apartments and have 2 kids per apartment, you're about 1,000 new kids in the district. So I think we have to understand the impact on numbers, revenues, expenses, transportation. Of course, we're committed to educate all children in the community, but I think we need to understand this a little more closely. And we as a board will discuss this and we'll be getting back to you formally.
Thank you. And we do encourage you to please take a look at the DGEIS and the information that's contained with those projections therein. The next person we have is Don Feinberg.
I just woke up. I want to thank you all. You all work very hard, and I of course find, for people who don't know, I actually own the Rite Aid, so I'm one of those people who can either be vilified or lionized, depending on your opinion. I wanted though to do 2 things if I could. These are just comments; they're not really questions. I wanted to sort of say that change occurs whether we like it or not, and the issue I think is whether or not we want to manage that change to the best of our abilities, and our abilities change over time. But as we say right now, I'm looking at my property, I don't think anybody would be happy and say that we add to the quaintness of Chappaqua. We have a 50-car parking lot, which is used for no other reason than to basically let people run in and out, stay there as long as they want. The building is empty. It doesn't have to be empty. It's empty because you have a moratorium. But I wouldn't say even if it were an active spot and if it were serving the community as a retail or as it was before, there would necessarily be a quaint contribution. And so I just want to say, my second comment is really looking towards the future, that from my point of view, it's very easy to terrorize ourselves about what terrible things might happen. You guys have made a point about timeline. People want to focus on 1,000 units and how many people that might or might not be. This is going to take place over time. If I were to start tomorrow to develop my property, I'd be lucky to have a building up in there, assuming everything was copacetic for you, in 4 years. I think that's a reasonable timeline. But let's imagine what I might do with that. We might have a building there that's green. And as a green building, it might actually even be not just LEED green, but actually net zero green. If it were net zero green, we might be able to attract people who are a totally different type of people who want to live in Chappaqua, but they have certain ideas environmentally that right now the town is not addressing. Right now the town is really, while quaint, is environmentally, I would say, not very efficient. You have parking lots that are filled with cars for 8 hours a day that are empty. Nothing's happening, and it's not happening except to take people to the train, get them to wherever they work. which maybe now they don't want to work necessarily where they're going, and they might prefer to work closer to home. So imagine, if we will, a building that could have millennials in them. Well, they might not be millennials by the time the building is built, but are now millennials. Or imagine that they might have people like my mother, who lived in Armonk, who had a house and didn't want to live in her house anymore, and was looking for a downtown where she could walk to various services and enjoy herself and jump on the train now and again to go visit the city. So instead of just terrorizing ourselves about what would be horrible, how many families there might be, the cost of the education, let's look at the people that we might be able to bring into downtown Chappaqua, who might enjoy a different lifestyle, who would contribute to the town. And, you know, one of the things, I don't know if this is fair for me to say, but I did a crazy calculation. If you have 1,000 new families, that's a lot of money in downtown Chappaqua. At the present sort of average household income, it's something like $250 million. That's a lot of money that could be spent in downtown. I'm not saying it all would be. It may be even a frightening number to some people. But again, if you're talking about this doing it over 15 years, we're not talking about an insignificant sum. What we are talking about, though, and I think listening to everybody, it's something that I guess you guys have to consider, is presently the town merely acts as a service center to the outlying residences. And what we're really talking about doing, and what I'm excited about participating in, is having it be a living community with a heart downtown where people live there and they actually enjoy living there. And it would be different. That part of it would be different, but I would submit it would be better. So those are my comments for this evening. I could go on, but I wanted to make them.
John, thank you so much. We appreciate your being here and those comments as well.
Thank you. I would just very quickly, Warren, I just want to let you know, and I apologize. I found the email, John Chow, Jill Shapiro, Sabrina, Christina Ackerman, Jane Shepherdson, and I thought Ms. Tip was there, but I could be wrong. It was in June. Thank you.
The next person we're bringing into the call, Antonia Clearwaters.
Hi, can you hear me?
Hi, Annette. Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, I just want to say Alexander's comment was really helpful, how the floor height was determined. That would probably be my main comment, is when I looked at that plan, I would just like one story to come off of everything, where it was 2 to 5, I'd rather see 2 to 4, 2 to 4, I'd rather see 2 to 3. I'd also like to back up Lori's comment about having not just neighbors notify, and I'm also a little concerned about notified. Notified is one thing, having actual input is another. And I know when I put a shed up in my backyard, I notify my neighbors, but obviously that was very low stakes. But you know, how much say and how much input do the neighbors and preferably community members really have in potentially modifying some proposal? You know, that's something I would have concerns over. And I know that like the floor height thing, that sounds like that'll be the October 15th, the alternatives, maybe. That meeting will probably be more helpful. But those are the two things I kind of wanted to comment on. And I think a lot of the fear is based on that max build out, which is a little scary. And I know just from a practicality measure, you know, the low hanging fruit, the most attractive pieces are what is going to be taken first, right? I mean, you're not gonna have a slew of developers buying everything up and proposing everything in month 1. So, you know, the most attractive parcels would be first. And then I guess my question is there, are there ways that as the process goes, if the town board, if the town as a whole goes kind of like, oh shoot, maybe we really we allowed too much, like what are the opportunities to potentially ratchet back? And I understand that could potentially opening the town to lawsuits and things like that. But I think that might address a lot of concerns from the town members, just in a sense that, you know, everyone looks at this max build out, and even if you sort of mentally or emphasize that that's not what it's going to be, but at the same time, what are the mechanisms to potentially, stall things if they go too far, too fast, or, you know, I don't know. I'm not sure exactly. My comment is more that I think that the residents would feel better if we had some sense of being able to,
Right. I mean, one thing Sorry, I'm interrupting you.
No, that's really the end of it.
Yeah, sorry. I started to form a thought, and I wanted to get it out there before I lost it. One thing that I think is critical to understand is that the maximum build out not only requires the consolidation of property, but it absolutely requires the sale of town-owned property. Not only because that gets you to the number of residential units that are discussed in the maximum build out, but also because that sale of town-owned property would then come with it a rethinking of the parking that exists today and the building of a parking garage that would then have additional parking that would support the development that would happen in the non-town-owned property. So there's also a bit of a backstop there, which is that not only that the maximum build out not only requires the consolidation of property, but really does require substantial thought to the redevelopment of the town-owned property today. So that's just one thing. It literally just came to my mind. I wanted to throw it out there. Sabrina, I don't know if you want to address any of the other issues that Annette raised. I mean, they're all great points.
Yeah, no, I think this is all a healthy discussion.
Okay, thanks, Annette. Suzanne Chazen is our next attendee.
Hi, Ivy. Hi. So, I'm going to kind of put the elephant in the room here. I think one of the problems is I don't think most residents are concerned about creating a vibrant hamlet. I don't think that's a bad idea. And certainly, Don Feinberg is talking about redeveloping the Rite Aid, and nobody would say that's a beautiful building or not worthy of doing. I think one of the problems about this is that while I appreciate that all of you think this has been going on since 2014, I'd just like to revisit those numbers. In 2014, maximum 252 people in town were engaged. Right now on this site, there are 60. So we have almost a quarter of the people who were apparently engaged 6 years ago right here tonight. So I think that as much as I'm sure you think you did all this outreach, a lot of residents really did not get this opportunity to say how they feel about any of this. I know you say that the master plan represents everything that the public engagement said, except nowhere in the master plan does it say 4 and 5 stories. It doesn't say any stories. So one could conceivably read the master plan and say, absolutely, we need a vibrant hamlet. Absolutely, we could build up to 3 stories. Absolutely, we want a bucolic downtown and we don't want to have 17 storefronts. And that's all fine. But the problem is, and then you go on and you mention that you did the downtown working group, but that was developers and an architect. It wasn't residents who had no stake in anything. So again, we have all these places where people did not have an opportunity to say, I've lived here 22 years, did not have an opportunity to say, I don't want this. I don't mind a vibrant downtown. I don't mind business owners of buildings doing things and us finding ways to do that. There's a thing, by the way, called pattern zoning, which would be a perfect hybrid. And there's ways to do this. There's ways to develop. But this notion of going up beyond 3 stories is destroying the town. And you didn't, I know you didn't mean this. I'm sure you meant well, but the fact is that the residents were not on board with that at any time. They weren't in the 252 in 2014. They weren't told in the 2017 master plan. And I just looked at the DGIS now that you just released the final one today, and every single thing from traffic to parking to environment all comes out as fine. Everything's good. The sewer's good. The water's good. The schools are good. The parking, the thing that you just released today, I went through and I yellow highlighted, and I can't see a single place that says that the wasn't found to be adequate. There was no place where they said, we did not find this. Now, maybe I misread it, but I cannot see, and reading this afternoon when it came out, I cannot see anywhere where there is a concern that 2,000, almost 2,000 additional people, and you say 15 years, we don't know. We didn't know we were going to have COVID. So we don't know how long it's going to be, but we know we could have up to 2,000, almost 2,000 people. We could have up to almost 1,000 units. Jeremy earlier mentioned that you have to negate the number of houses that you wouldn't have, except I think it's a -4. So I don't think, so it's a plus 997 in extra units. So we really are talking about a lot of extra building, a lot of extra people, possibly a lot of extra school children. Maybe you say one thing, other people say another, but there's a lot going on here. Nobody's arguing that vibrant hamlet isn't a good idea, but this stuff that you've been living with forever, nobody else has been living with in town. And that's where this disconnect is coming from. That's all I have to say.
Okay, thank you for your comment. The last person we have to speak is Christina Shi.
Hi.
Hi.
Can you hear me?
We can, yep.
Great. Okay, so I'd like to know, is it possible to break down the form-based code to different timelines? And because I realize that, for example, for Rite Aid, they have been stuck there because of the moratorium, and this is why it's facing decay. But so we are basically bundling the whole thing to current empty properties. So I would like to see the possibility to break this whole form-based code into different timelines, so that the current owners, they don't have to suffer the moratorium and keep waiting. And because we actually, I think that for example, separating the form-based code to, like, I feel like we all agree about the architectural part, and I do appreciate that the owner just said about like adding the ecological part, that's super important, that is not included in this code form. And also because the development of the parking lot is something that most of us are very concerned, we should let this this issue, which is will actually keep delaying the development of the current properties. Can we just put them in a separate part, so to wait for more public input? That's all I have to say.
So, I mean, I guess the only thing I would say in response to that is that this is not a development plan. So what I mean by that is when the legislation passes, you are not going to instantly see all of these property owners come together to consolidate property to begin development that would move us swiftly on a path towards the maximum potential build out scenario. We heard from Don, who's on the call tonight. He has an urgent interest in redeveloping his property. We know from conversations with current property owners that urgency, that strong desire to move quickly does not exist everywhere, that there are many property owners, some property owners who would not intend to take advantage of the changes in our zoning legislation, certainly not eminently, and possibly, not ever. There is nothing about changing the zoning that immediately means that all of these dominoes are going to fall and we're going to march towards this maximum build out scenario. So, you mentioned we're under a moratorium. It's a critically important point. We have frozen all development and all building permits in our hamlet until such a time as we complete this rezoning effort. And that is one of the critical reasons that we're moving at pace right now to do our due diligence and to have these public conversations and to have our public hearings and to make sure that we complete the secret process the way that we are meant to. But we also need to do it at pace, because we need to get out from underneath this moratorium, which has restricted the ability not just of somebody like Don to be able to do something large scale on his property potentially, but also of current property owners who simply want to make changes that would require building permits. So it is one of the things that we're working towards, and that's, thank you for raising that important point. Sabrina, did you have anything you wanted to add there?
No, I think, Ivy, that you covered that. I mean, again, I want to urge everybody to attend the next public engagement session, to, access Chappaqua Forward on our website, on Chappaqua Forward's website, to look at the information, and, to arm yourselves with information to make useful comments to the town board as they consider this legislation towards the close of the year.
And I want to thank everybody for coming out tonight and for all of these comments. I heard many things that really resonated for me. There are several things that I want to take back and consider more deeply as we continue to think through what will be included in the final version of this code. I've said before, we are listening and we are open to alternatives, and that's the purpose of both the DGEIS. It's the purpose of these community engagement sessions, and it will certainly be the purpose of the public hearings when that begins later in the month of October. So thank you, everybody, for coming out tonight. Thank you for sticking with us through a long meeting. We really appreciate your time and your energy around this.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.